We'll call the meeting to order. The Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics, meeting 150. Pursuant to Standing Order 814, main estimates 2019-2020, vote 1 under Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying, vote 1 under the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, vote 1 under the Office of the Senate Ethics Officer, and votes 1, 5, 10, and 15 under the Offices of the Information and Privacy Commissioners of Canada, referred to the committee on Thursday, April 11th, 2019. And with us today, we have the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, Mr. Mario Dion, and with our Commissioner, Sandy Tremblay, Director of Corporate Management. In the second hour, we're going to get into the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying. With us will be Nancy Belanger, Commissioner of Lobbying, and Charles Dutriciak, Director of Finance and Chief Electoral or Finance Officer. Go ahead, Mr. Dion. It's good to see you back. Proceed for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Monsieur le Président, honorable membres du comité, j'aimerais...
Mr. Chairman, honorable members, I wish to thank you for allowing me to appear before you to examine the budget for the 2019 budget. As the Chair said, I'm accompanied by Sandy Tremblay. As you know, the purpose of my appearance today is to discuss the current budgetary requirements of the office. For context, I will begin by reviewing some of the projects and activities that we undertook last year, as well as some activities planned for this fiscal year. I will start with our mission because it is key. Everything the office does under my leadership is designed to support the achievement of that. Our office provides independent, rigorous, and consistent direction and advice to members of Parliament and the federal public office holders. That's the first thing. The second, it conducts investigations. And third, where necessary, it makes use of appropriate sanctions in order to ensure full compliance with the Conflict of Interest Code for members of the House of Commons and the Conflict of Interest Act. Last year, we implemented a rolling 3-year strategic plan to guide our projects and activities in support of our mission. It identified 3 key priorities, those being to improve communications and outreach, to modernize technology and information management structures, and to maintain operational excellence. It also identified how we would achieve them. One key priority is to build and improve communications and outreach processes to help members and public office holders understand and meet their obligations under the Code and the Act. Education and outreach have been a key focus of my approach as Commissioner for about a year and a half, one which we will continue to push forward. I believe education and outreach go a long way in preventing conflict of interest by ensuring members and public office holders are aware of their obligations. I want to go beyond the traditional classroom approach to educational presentations and leverage new media technology for presentations and other uses. So we look at all the educational materials that our office has issued over the past 12 years on how to explain the rules of the Code and the Act. The goal was to simplify them to make them a more effective source of information for members and public office holders. Last year, we revised and updated 12 of those documents, condensing their content into 7 new information notices that explain various requirements of this Act. This project will continue in the current fiscal year and will address provisions of the Code. As far as new methods are concerned, we also organized 2 webinars together with the Lobbying Commissioner And we adopted a more proactive, dynamic approach using Twitter to communicate directly with members and public office holders. We also produced a few short videos to provide additional channels and reach our stakeholders.
A second priority in our strategic plan was to modernize technology and information management structures. So last November, we launched a new version of our case management system. All the information from our old system was migrated to the new one, and our upgraded information technology infrastructure is compatible with existing systems and allows the office to explore new technology options for delivering our mandate. We are still dealing with technical and procedural issues, but I am confident that they will be resolved by the end of this fiscal year. We're also presently working on the development of a new website that will make it a more effective source of information for members of Parliament and public office holders. It will be mobile friendly, which is not the case now, and so that it better reaches our busy stakeholders on the device platforms available today. We're planning to launch our new website before the October 2019 election. Our third key priority that we identified in our strategic plan is to maintain operational excellence with a focus on our people and on the tools that we have at our disposal. In my first year, I took steps to ensure that our office had invested in employees' training and professional development and provided the tools and equipment they need to perform their jobs. I also acted to ensure that we offer a respectful, diverse, and inclusive workplace. I was asked last year whether I'd be making recommendations in my annual reports to strengthen the regimes that we administer. At this time last year, with only a few months of experience, I did not feel ready to do so in the annual reports. I did express the hope last year that the committee would invite me to present my thoughts on possible amendments last fall. Otherwise, I would include something in this year's annual reports. Indeed, that is what we'll do shortly next month, in June. The office will be tabling its two annual reports, one under the Act, one under the Code. And we have drafted some potential amendments that would strengthen the operation of the Act in the event there is another review of the legislation. And we will include some of those key points in our annual report under the Act. Our strategic plan provides also my organization with a guiding document. It's used to align our priorities as we deliver on our mission to provide independent, rigorous, and consistent direction and advice. And I will report on our achievements under the strategic plan in future annual reports to Parliament. Investigations continues to be an area where there is a lot of interest on the part of the public and parliamentarians. We've been very active in relation to investigations. In 2018-19, we issued 8 investigation reports, 5 under the Act, 3 under the Code. There are currently 4 matters that I have yet to report on, and our investigation team must balance confidentiality, integrity, procedural fairness, with work that is very complex and time-sensitive. Le commissariat accomplit sa mission avec un total de 40.
Our office conducts its operations with 49 full-time positions. The Advisory and Compliance Division accounts for over 1/3 of our staff resources. This is reflective of their daily interactions with those individuals, over 3,000 people. This interaction forms the majority of the work of the office in compliance, accounting for over 2,000 calls or inquiries last year. The remainder of the office falls into 3 broad categories: corporate services that Ms. Bélanger directs, communications, led by Ms. Rossworth, and investigations and legal services. Our objective is rigor, professionalism, and guidance on compliance matters. I have complete confidence in the quality of work and the integrity of all members of my senior management team and all employees in general.
And the demands on our resources, I expect our office will be able to implement its mission in this upcoming fiscal year with a budget of $7.1 million. It represents a slight increase of 4% from the last fiscal year. The base budget has been unchanged in the 12 years of existence of the office. This is the first actual increase of 4%, and it's needed this year to enable our office to prepare for the election. while continuing to ensure operational excellence. There has traditionally been a significant increase in the workload whenever there is a general election, and we wanted to be ready to prepare for it. It's a key, election readiness is a key focus of our activity already at this point in time. We've started to hire term employees to help with the increased workload. We're also updating letters and information kits for potentially new members of parliament, for people who will be joining offices, ministerial offices in the future, and so on and so forth. So all of these elements flow from our strategic plan and will enable the office to better serve its stakeholders in a busy election year. As part of this planning, we always have a reserve. We have $100,000 which we do not allocate in order to face in a nimble way important changes and what the needs would be. So I am confident that we'll be able, with this budget that is before you, to operate efficiently, effectively, and also economically in carrying out our mission. So, Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening statement. I'll now be happy to discuss any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just for the sake of the committee too, we did have an amended agenda, so the agenda before you is incorrect. So we're going to 4:15. It gives us enough time. I'm going to try and get us through the first four questioners. In the first, so it'll be Ms. Fortier, Mr. Kent, Mr. Cullen, and Mr. Erskine-Smith, and then we'll move on to the next commissioner. That's all the time we have. So just to clarify, so the agenda again is amended. It'll take us to about 4:20 or so. So, all right. Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Madame Fortier.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Dion, and thank Ms. Bélanger for being with us today. We know that you work very hard. We see that you've had an opportunity to prepare this presentation. I have just a few questions, things I'd like clarified about the challenges that you may have within your office. I understand the strategic planning and your priorities, but perhaps you could share your current challenges and what measures you take to meet those challenges. We always have the challenge of timeliness. That is, we have to provide our services in a timely manner. So we have service standards for the first contact we establish. That creates pressure. We have service standards for dealing with the public as well. We have pressure even if there are no timetables in the law, but there's investigation, there's pressure for things to be done in a timely manner with celerity so that the report is still pertinent when it becomes available. That's one challenge, is to always operate with the feeling that things have to go ahead. They have to move fast. And do this in a way that's consistent. That is, that we provide answers that are similar from one case to another, because I think that members and public office holders appreciate some predictability. So we need tools to make sure we're consistent and coherent in our advice. We also have to have a professional team. The work environment has to remain stimulating so that the people... Well, the only resource we have are our workers. They're professionals who provide the services, and we want to keep them because it's a steep learning curve. So basically, well, there's rigor too. Consistency, rigor, it's not quite the same thing. We try to be very rigorous in everything we do. I understand those pressures you have right now. You manage them. There's nothing that'll stop you from achieving your mandate. That's what I'm to understand. Well, up to date, that's the truth, unless there's an incredible, steep increase in the workload. But right now, as things stand, we can juggle all those aspects that I just mentioned without too much difficulty. Things are working. Since I'm sharing my time with my colleague, I just wanted to put another question to you. At the end of your presentation, you talked about the election that's coming up. We're all fully aware that that's coming up. How does this affect your workload? Is that in the short term, or how could you share the workflow when it comes to the election? Well, it will happen after October 21, according to the results of the vote. There will be people that will leave. There will be new MPs. I don't know how many there will be. Nobody knows. There are new MPs with whom we have to communicate within 3 days of their election. So that's an increased workload. There's raising awareness among people elected for the first time who don't know the code at all and have to be familiarized with it. Given that there could be a different cabinet or a different party in power forming the government, we could potentially end up with hundreds of new minister staff members who are public office holders under the meaning of the Act. So we're facing potentially hundreds of new people administered as of October 22nd. So I'll share the rest of my time with my colleague. Good afternoon, Ms. Bélanger, Mr. Dion.
That last month you signed a memorandum of understanding with the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying to do education outreach, which I think is an excellent idea. And I think that by combining this activity, the more outreach and education you do, especially to MPs, it will dramatically reduce, I think, the questions and some of the investigations that you may undertake. Is there an efficiency sort of subset to this process where you're the more you educate, the more outreach that you're doing, you should see the amount of questions and cases drop?
Yeah, there's in the long term, I am convinced that this will produce a better adherence to the code and the Act, and therefore will produce less work for us in terms of having to order things or having to investigate things. But it's not our objective. I think the objective is based on the desire to make sure that we put in the hands of the people who are governed by the code and by the Act the necessary knowledge so that they can actually ensure that they abide by these things on an ongoing basis. That's the goal.
Have you developed any programs so far with the Office of Commissioner of Lobbying?
Yeah, we've done a webinar, one in French, one in English, a few months ago. We had, I think, 130 people who attended the webinars. And we were focusing on the area of overlap between the Lobbying Act and the Conflict of Interest Act, and the code as well for members of the House of Commons. So we were happy with the registration, and we intend to repeat the experience in the coming year as well.
So my final question is, now that you're developing these programs, do you think that the collaboration between your office and the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying will result in programs being, or more enhanced information, more enhanced sort of tools for new MPs after the next election?
I am convinced. It's only a question of degree, but we will have a much better, both qualitatively and in terms of the support that we'll be using. We'll use technology. We'll communicate in a way that's consistent with the 21st century and not only with words on paper, with legalese on paper. We're trying to move to plain language, real time, accessible 24/7, wherever you may be on the planet.
Now, I noticed on your strategic plan for 2018-2021, the second point is to modernize technology and information management structures. Are you talking about just upgrading the technology from one generation to the next generation? Or are you talking about a wholesale change in the software and the technology itself?
No, we're talking about upgrading, essentially, at this point, vis-a-vis the case management system. But we are slowly starting to explore other possibilities with, for instance, using AI in terms of carrying out our mandate. We have a wealth of information. We do not essentially use the information to the maximum extent that we could use it in order to prevent or identify potential conflicts of interest. So we're trying to inform ourselves about AI and whether it could be put to use in future years in any way in carrying out our mission. That's an example of an additional technological measure that we're looking at.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
City. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Kent.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Commissioner, Ms. Tremblay, for appearing before committee today. Commissioner, it's good to have you with us again, and I hope your health issues have been resolved. I'd like to ask questions starting with the 4 matters which are still currently under investigation. And when you began the investigation into the allegations that Prime Minister Trudeau or staff in his office unduly pressured the former Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, to intervene in a criminal prosecution of the Quebec company SNC-Lavalin. You said you believed that the grounds for the investigation would be on possible violation of Section 9. In carrying out that investigation, and I know you haven't reported yet, and we must be discreet in our questions, was there more than one member or one office holder involved in that investigation?
Of course, as the member has pointed out, I am quite limited in what I can share with the committee or anybody else for that matter in relation to an ongoing investigation. When we launched on our own volition under Section 45 of the Act back in February, the focus is on the Prime Minister. But indeed, the member is right that there are several other public office holders who are being interviewed or will be interviewed to essentially review the facts that were largely reported in the public domain. Mostly political aides who allegedly also played a role have been or will be interviewed soon.
Now, the former clerk of the Privy Council said, and this is some months ago now, I think, and this is a quote, I think the Ethics Commissioner could get to the bottom of this fairly quickly. Will you be able to advise the committee whether you will be able to report before the House rises in June?
In fact, I can inform the committee right this afternoon that there will not be a report by mid-June. I expect the House to raise mid-June or the third week of June, and we will not have a report. I can assure you of that.
And before October 21st?
We are working hard to produce a report within the next few months.
With regards to the other three matters, one of them, I assume, being Member Vandenbeld, the other two matters are of what nature, sir? Please refresh.
They're unfortunately not. According to our research, they're not currently in the public domain. One of them is not in the public domain, but the report will be issued in a couple of weeks. So you'll find out 2 weeks from now what was the third matter. And as to the fourth matter, it's a situation involving MP Grumwald that is in the public domain.
Right. Jumping back just a bit now to the investigation, the allegations regarding the Prime Minister or others in his office or in other ministerial offices, has the Prime Minister been cooperative? I recall that your predecessor in the investigation of the illegal vacation on the Aga Khan's Island, it took some months for the Prime Minister to make himself available for conversations. Has he been more available in this situation?
I think it's fair to say that we are very pleased with both the speed with which and the extent of the cooperation at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. Moving now to the discussion earlier of the work that you've been doing with the lobbying commissioners and the webinars. I think the webinars were very helpful, very informative. But I'm wondering, and surely you're aware of the federal court's direction to the current lobbying commissioner to reopen the investigation of the other side of the Trudeau report with regards to the illegal gift, on one hand, accepted by the Prime Minister, but the fact that the lobbying commissioner's predecessor found nothing wrong with the lobby side of that relationship. Do you believe that in working together, or have you had a chance to talk with the new lobbying commissioner about this is exactly the sort of situation where if wrongdoing is found on one side of an officer of Parliament and a lobbyist, there must be wrongdoing on the other side?
First of all, I think I would like to use this occasion, Mr. Chair, to point out that the lobbying commissioner and myself never discuss, of course, any ongoing investigation that we may be carrying out. It's a bit premature to conclude what the result of the new investigation into the Aga Khan that she will be launching will be. But I understand the member's question. Of course, there is I spoke about an overlap. There are rules in the code concerning lobbyists, concerning gifts that they make to either members of parliament or public office holders. And there are rules in the Act and in the Code. And there is a certain degree of, there's an obvious connection between these provisions. And the lobbying commissioner and I are simply trying to explain to our constituents, if you wish, or the stakeholders, our interpretation of these rules and how our interpretations are not inconsistent, by the way. They are quite consistent, if not completely consistent, and we're trying to emphasize that to the people that it's actually possible to respect both sets of rules at the same time, and and as the member pointed out, it's actually possible, of course, to violate both sets of rules at the same time.
Would you think a more explicit definition of gift or benefit would be helpful? And I'm thinking now back to the judgment, the Supreme Court judgment written by Madam Justice Leroux-Dubé, where she had a number of very precise definitions, which I don't believe are actually written into either your act or the Lobbying Act.
I hesitate to answer this question on spur of the moment. The definition of gift is quite extensive in our act and in the code as well. It's any advantage, any benefit, basically, received by a member. But I'd like to take this one under advisement if the chair would agree, because it's not. And I do not recall the judgment that he's referring to as well.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Kent, next up for 7 minutes, a visitor. Welcome back, Mr. Cullen. Go ahead.
Visitor. That sounds so stranger in the house and somehow intimidating. Commissioner, nice to see you. I'm glad you've returned, and I hope your health is well.
Very well.
You have important work to do on behalf of Canadians, but we are people too, and I'm glad to see you back and on the job.
Thank you very much.
I had some similar questions as to the outstanding reports, and I understand, I guess 3 out of the 4 have been identified, and we'll wait with bated breath to find out what the 4th one was. One small question on one of your investigations. As your senior counsel had to recuse herself, I believe her name is Ms. Richard, with one of the ongoing investigations?
Yes.
Okay. Can you remind me of Section 9? This was the focus of the report and the potential violation that your office detailed when you're elected.
Yeah, I have it right in front of me, Mr. Chair. I'll quickly read it. No public office holder shall use his or her position as a public office holder to seek to influence the decision of another person so as to further the private interest of somebody in his family, or to improperly further another person's private interest. So that's the section. It's about using your position to seek to influence a decision in order to improperly further another person's private interests. That's the focus of our investigation in the Trudeau matter.
Right, so because in that matter of Trudeau, the question of inappropriate pressure has been sometimes at the heart of other conversations. The Section 9 doesn't really deal with that aspect or any interpretation of that, what is inappropriate. It's simply the seeking to influence, is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Can you explain something I've had some Canadians ask me when dealing with ethics and violations of the Ethics Act? Under the scenario in which someone, say Mr. Erskine-Smith, received a lovely painting from somebody who was seeking to influence him, and it was deemed by your office to be inappropriate, would a normal recourse be for an MP in that position to return the gift that was deemed inappropriate or in a violation of the Ethics Act?
That's right. That would be the normal recourse. That would be most of the time what people actually are, we suggest that they do and that they actually are doing.
Would
Returning.
ever suggest Mr. Erskine-Smith would ever even receive such a thing. But imagine, let's go further. So if somebody having dealings with the government were then to offer travel, and it had some monetary value, expensive travel, as the case with the Aga Khan, I'm not understanding why not a return of the gift, because you can't. It's an experience. It was a trip. But certainly the value of the gift. If the office holder had gone out and just simply purchased that gift, which would have been purchased the travel, which would have been more appropriate, rather than receiving a gift, why do we not have within the Act the notion that, as in the case of the painting that was received illegally, a gift in the form of a sponsored trip, which was also deemed to be inappropriate or illegal, that the value of that trip would also not have to be compensated for. Am I making myself clear? I know it may be a too commonsensical kind of approach, but what's the difference?
I'd like to complete my earlier answer, Mr. Chair, by saying that, of course, we only intervene when the gift is actually disclosed. Okay, so there are several disclosures each month, but I'm convinced that there could be gifts also that are not always disclosed, and of course we cannot do anything if they're not being disclosed. If disclosed, we suggest that the gift be returned, and sometimes we suggest that the gift be reimbursed as well when it's not actually possible to return to the situation because it was a show or it was a public event that has already taken place. I have no power to order. We simply provide advice to people who disclose a gift. And so in the example of a trip, for instance, the advice may be given that somebody should reimburse the cost of the trip. But I don't have any tools in the Act to actually force the execution of my advice.
So in the first example I used, if an MP were to receive a painting or some gift that you can foresee, you can advise them that they should return the gift if it was received inappropriately. You can't order it. Is that correct?
That's right.
Did you at any point advise Mr. Trudeau that he should return compensate for the travel that was sponsored that was deemed to be unethical or illegal?
I did not. I do not know if my predecessor did. Because this matter was finished prior to my assuming the duties on January 9, 2018.
For Canadians...
frankly, I did not raise that.
But you can understand where Canadians get confused. If something was given illegally or unethically, and to say in the form of a trip, it just would seem to make common sense that if it was done inappropriately, whether it was disclosed or not, but it was eventually found out, then it was like, what's the difference between a $10,000 sponsored trip or someone just giving you $10,000 to go take a trip? If somebody handed a politician an envelope with $10,000 in it, heaven forbid, to try to win some influence with them, and then they use that money to go and take their family on vacation, what's the difference? Under the code, is there any difference between those two scenarios? Sales tax. Very good.
Yeah, I would prefer not to try to hypothesize on those situations, but I guess you know what the prohibitions are. It's not giving the gift that might be prohibited. It's receiving the gift, accepting the gift. The code, that's what the code and the Act govern. It's the acceptance of a gift. Once you've accepted a gift, you've done something which is only partly reversible. And we provide advice as to how to reverse the situation. Sometimes it's not possible to reverse the situation.
Yeah.
And we do not have the power to order any specific action on the part of the office holder who has accepted a gift that he or she should not have accepted.
Understood. So again, back to your timeline on the current investigation, I think you responded to a colleague's question, not by mid-June, but within the next few months. That places it sometime within the summer range, give or take. I know you can't be specific with the date. And you said you have some outstanding interviews to conduct?
Yeah, we still have some interviews to conduct. There can always be a number of surprise elements if you wish. We want to also produce a report that is of at least the same quality as previous reports have been. So it does take time. But I am confident that within the next few months we will complete this report, barring something completely unforeseen.
Just very quickly, you said you were getting ready for the election. Is there any particular area in terms of the Act or the Code that you foresee being a focal point for your work as we go into the election cycle?
No, nothing in particular. We know what the prevalence of problems are, and we will assume that in the future it will be quite similar to what it is now. The issue of gifts is always number one on the list. We have also the issue of the initial declarations, the time frames within which they should be returned. We will review our forms as well with this goal of being plain language as well and user friendly as much as possible, including the use of technology.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Next up, or last up, Mr. Erskine-Smith for 7 minutes.
Thanks very much. So based on the information we have here, you've got 49 full-time positions, about a third are advisory and compliance. What are the 2/3 of the positions? What are they for?
It's more than 1/3, in fact. 18 are advisory and compliance
18, okay.
out of the 49.
Okay.
We have 11 in corporate services. which deals with HR, IMIT, finance, all the obligations that we have as a public sector entity that has a number of laws and that it has to abide with.
How many was that in the corporate and HR?
11.
11. Okay. Yep.
11 FTEs.
Yeah.
We have 8 in outreach and communications, media relations, and so on and so forth. And we have 8 in legal and investigations.
Okay. And so am I right then? You've got 2,000 inquiries and calls every year, or in the last year, and that would be the 18 people that are dealing with that?
That's right.
So that would be less than 120?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
It's less than the 18. It's about 8. We have 8 advisors. Of the 18, 8 are professional advisors. We also have staff that is of a more clerical nature to make sure that the annual reviews, for instance, go out on time, that all the mechanics, if you wish, of both the Act and the Code.
Okay, because I'm just trying to wrap my head around the caseload, and the caseload seems to me, if you've got 8 people plus some legal counsel that might get involved in some of these where it gets escalated, you've got a little over 200 inquiries, calls per employee. That seems like an incredibly modest, just having practiced law previously, if you told me I had 200 calls and inquiries a year to deal with, I would say, you mean I don't have 10 times that amount? So I'm a bit, given we're dealing with estimates today, I just wonder, it doesn't seem to me that each individual has the fullest of loads, but maybe I've got that wrong.
I think, Mr. Chair, that the member raised the same issue last year, and I can assure you that nobody is tumbling their thumbs. There are some very complex matters that sometimes somebody makes a call, public office holder makes a call about an issue, and sometimes it will take weeks or months to resolve the issue. Some of them are very complex. They're not all simple. They require some follow-up. There are several instances, as you pointed out, where the legal advisors are consulted because there is a new or somewhat complex legal matter that arises.
Thanks very much.
But that's the caseload. That's the number of employees, and I guess you'll have to take my word for it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's why you're here. So every time you're here and every time the lobbying commissioner is here, and I see that 18 employees are actually doing the core work, and there's supporting employees otherwise to do outreach, comms, and HR. Every single time both offices are here before me, I think there's massive duplication for small offices in HR, and there's so much coordination otherwise that is useful and necessary for the offices. Are you of the view that it would make sense to combine the offices?
The mandates are quite different. The group that we manage are different. It's conceivable that they could be merged. I have never really addressed my mind to it.
Wouldn't we save just on HR and outreach alone, there would probably be significant savings, no?
I was an ADM of corporate services a long time ago, and of course there could be economies of scale. It's obvious.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Do you have in your view, do you have a sufficient mandate to do your job? So I know part of the question that we're speaking about here with the estimates is about resources, and do you have the resources in your current mandate? But as you approach different investigations over your now, a not insignificant time in your office, do you feel that you have the appropriate mandate?
I wish I could have more authority to actually recommend something as an investigation is completed, because all I have under the Act, I have the power to analyze the facts, share that analysis with the Prime Minister. I do not have the power to even recommend anything under the Act. I wish I would have that power, because I think it could make a difference in the actual effectiveness, if you wish, of the process. And in the code, the situation is different, because I do have the power to make it. There's an explicit power to recommend a sanction. I wish I had the same authority under the Act.
I appreciate that. And so where you would make a finding of impropriety, you would make a recommendation to cure that in some fashion. Is that the idea?
Including some measures possibly to make sure it doesn't happen again within government. As I've done in my former mandate as Public Sector Integrity Commissioner, I've done that on a few occasions because I had the latitude of doing that under the statute. I don't in this one.
But it would only be, you would only make comments like that. The idea would be where an improper, some improper comments.
Of course. Yes, sorry. But you can still never, even if a contravention is not found, you can still have observed something which would cause you to make a recommendation.
And
it's still possible.
I've not had many dealings with your office, probably thankfully. I haven't received many paintings. I don't think I've received any paintings. In fact, it's funny, Mr. Collins suggested that example. If my parents were watching, they would say, "Oh no, our son's not cultured enough to receive paintings." But I have had one dealing with your office, and I returned the gift on your advice, but I disagreed with your advice. I think it continues to be wrong at law, and I've talked to some of my colleagues who have, in identical instances, received different advice from your office, which is of concern to me. So I appreciate, you've got different employees and different decisions will be made, and but of course you won't make the perfect decision or the right decision all the time. I think most of the time you will. Mistakes happen to the best of us. When a mistake does happen and a member of parliament disagrees with the interpretation, or a cabinet minister disagrees with the interpretation, is there any recourse that we have?
Under the Act, there's a very narrow window for judicial review. Under the code, there is no recourse outside of the House of Commons. And of course, the member has the possibility of raising it within the House of Commons and use processes within the House of Commons.
And so to that end, if you issue a report outside of sitting weeks, we wouldn't have, and there's something wrong in that report, there wouldn't be that same recourse.
If I issue a report under the code, I can only do so when the speaker is the House is sitting, if I'm not mistaken. So I can look at the. So I shall report to the speaker, who shall present the report to the House when it next sits. So I can send it to the speaker. It's tabled in the House as soon as possible, and there's a right on the part of the member whose conduct has been examined in the report to asked to speak after question period for up to 20 minutes to explain his or her situation.
Fair enough. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
As it's been mentioned, Commissioner, we wish you good health from our committee. And we'd like to see you again soon. And we'll suspend until we have the other commissioner come in. So thanks again for appearing today.
Thank you for the good wishes, Mr. Chair, and it was a pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. Again, I won't go over what I just read through before, but we want to welcome with us Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying, Nancy Belanger, the Commissioner, and also with our Commissioner, Charles Dutriziak. I'm sure I'm saying that incorrect, but if you could help, how do you say it? If you could do that, please?
Dutrisac.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Dutrisac. There we go. The Director of Finance and Chief Financial Officer. And I apologize to everybody here today. We had votes that really shortened our time even more than we had already shortened it. So go ahead, Ms. Belanger, for 10 minutes.
Thank you. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I would like to start by acknowledging that we are meeting today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to discuss with you the main estimates, our accomplishments of the past year, and our ongoing priorities. I am joined by Charles Dutrisac, Director of Finance and Chief Financial Officer.
Busy year for us. Just this week, we moved to a new location, designed as an activity-based workplace. This move was a demanding endeavor and would not have been possible without the incredible dedication of members of my team and the professional expertise of employees of Public Services and Procurement Canada and Shared Services Canada. I sincerely thank them for their commitment in ensuring the success of this project. So to mark this success, we are planning an open house in June, so you can soon expect an invitation to visit our new office. Selon la loi sur le lobbying,
the Lobbying Act mandates that I maintain a registry of lobbyists, ensure compliance with the Act and the Lobbyist Code of Conduct, and foster awareness of both the Act and the Code. To carry out this mandate, we developed last year a 3-year strategic plan that included 4 key result areas. I will set out some of our accomplishments and current priorities for each of them. The first key result is a modern lobbyist registration system. The registry enables transparency by giving Canadians access to information about federal lobbying activities. On any given day, there are about 5,500 active lobbyists registered. This past year, lobbyists used our system to report details of more than 27,000 communications and with designated public office holders. To make it easier and faster for lobbyists to register, we have streamlined this registration process for new registrants. In the next year, we will improve the system to make it more user-friendly and mobile-friendly for the registrant. This will assist in information becoming public more quickly. We will also continue to benefit from the recommendations following the evaluations of our client services. Overall, the evaluation concluded that our approach with clients is effective and contributes to increasing compliance. Some recommendations related to the registry and outreach activities will need to be assessed.
Is effective compliance and enforcement activities. I have streamlined the investigation process to address allegations of non-compliance while continuing to ensure that decisions are fair and impartial and meet the necessary procedural fairness requirements. Allegations of non-compliance are now dealt with in 2 steps. First, a preliminary assessment is undertaken to evaluate the nature of the alleged contravention, to obtain initial information, and determine whether the subject matter falls within my mandate. Following this assessment, and when necessary to ensure compliance with either the Act or the Code, an investigation is commenced. In the last year, 21 preliminary assessments were closed, of which 4 led to investigations. There are currently 11 ongoing preliminary assessments. With respect to investigations, I recently tabled a report to Parliament related to sponsored travel provided by 19 different corporations and organizations. I also suspended and referred 3 investigations to the RCMP as I had reasonable grounds to believe that an offense had occurred under the Act. 13 other investigations were ceased, and as of today, there are a total of 15 investigations in our active caseload. Finally, with respect to the 5-year prohibition on lobbying, we are developing an online tool to simplify applications for exemptions by former designated public office holders. Le troisième domaine clé est l'amélioration de la sensibilisation et des communications à l'égard des Canadiens et Canadiennes. Au cours de la dernière année, nous avons fait 70 présentations à des lobbyistes.
This past year, we undertook webinars together with the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. We also updated our guidance on the rules pertaining to the code. The priorities for this year will include updating and redesigning our website to make it easier for visitors to find information. We will also develop targeted communication products and tools based on an analysis of inquiries received from stakeholders. I will continue to develop recommendations for the next statutory review of the Act to enhance the federal framework for lobbying.
Not least key area is an exceptional workplace. It is important to me that the employees of my office feel valued, understand the importance of their work, and that they be proud of working at the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying. The results of the Public Service Employee Survey certainly indicate that we're in the right direction to be an employer of choice. When it comes to employee satisfaction with their workplace, the 2018 survey results place the office among the top 5 of all federal department and agencies. We implemented and will continue to support our mental health strategy, and we're also trying to create a career development program tailored to the reality of such a small office. The office delivers on its mandate through the invaluable work of 27 dedicated employees. The 2019-20 main estimates for the office are about $4.8 million. With the exception of $350,000 dedicated to the relocation simply for this year, this is essentially the same amount since the creation of the previous office in 2005. Personnel costs represent about 70% of the expenditures, so $3.4 million. The remaining $1.1 million operating budget is used to acquire program support and corporate services, including HR, finance, IT, and contracting services, as well as to cover miscellaneous costs. 55% of the $1.1 million is to obtain services from other government institutions, and this approach provides access to a wide range of expertise in a cost-effective manner. Looking ahead, I have concerns about the current budget envelope. Our fiscal reality is attempting to operate with the budget established in 2005. $4.5 million may have been sufficient at that time, but today it means that there is practically no flexibility to reallocate financial resources, hire additional human resources, or to make the necessary investments in systems with today's price tags. The registry is a statutory requirement, and it is vital for transparency. Constant investments are required to ensure the registry remains up to date with evolving IT standards and to enhance the accessibility of the information. The work that is being performed by the office has also evolved in complexity, litigiousness, and level of scrutiny. I'm therefore studying the cost implications and will make the necessary funding requests in the fall to ensure that we can adequately meet our mandate. La loi sur le lobbying continue d'être une loi importante et pertinente. En fin de compte, il est primordial pour moi que le travail du commissariat.
I'm therefore studying the cost implications. The Lobbying Act continues to be an important and relevant piece of legislation. Ultimately, it is essential to me that the work of the office is done in such a way as to provide value for money. I want to end by recognizing the unwavering engagement and resolve of the employees of the office, who more often than not are asked to go well beyond what is required of their position. I so very much appreciate their input and support in assisting me to enhance the accessibility, transparency, and accountability of the federal lobbying regime. I thank you for your attention.
And I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll start off with Mr. Graham for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll get straight into it. I'll put it this way. I don't have a lot of patience for professional lobbyists. And as far as I can tell, they bill clients based on how many meetings they get and multiplied by how many people are at them, rather than what they actually achieve at those meetings. So I generally refuse to meet with them unless they're from my writing or in my writing. But so basically, if people have enough resources to tell me what to think, I probably don't want to hear from them. But are you aware of how much professional lobbyists bill and are paid, and does it matter for your purposes?
I do not know.
You have no idea how they're paid or the pay structures are, and there's no impact. Okay.
No, and it is not a requirement of our current regime to ask how many lobbyists, how much are they're being paid. It is a requirement in the U.S., and so it's quite a popular thing. But in Canada, it's not a requirement, and quite frankly, I have not seen the need for it so far.
When I was elected in 2015, your predecessor, Ms. Shepherd, gave us an introduction to your office at our MP orientation, and I asked her a simple question: what is the difference between lobbying and influence peddling? And she gave me the simple answer that influence peddling is illegal, which was partly what I was looking for. In my experience, a lot of former MPs and staffers go on to become lobbyists, and I guess it's better money for fewer hours. But what is it they're selling? Is it the fact that they are well-known and well-respected? And if they call, everyone takes the call, and based on their connections and reputation, they can therefore get more meetings? Or is it because they're offering process knowledge and how the House works and subject matter knowledge to policymakers? One of those, I think, is influence peddling. One is lobbying. Where do you draw the line between the two?
Okay, that's an interesting question. First of all, lobbying, as defined in the Lobbying Act, is considered a legitimate activity. Influence peddling is a different story. If you're a former designated public office holder, you're not allowed to lobby for 5 years. And so the scenario that you have given me, I'm not sure where we draw the line with respect to the facts either. I can only apply the law as it is written. And it recognizes that lobbying is a legitimate activity. And in fact, I appreciate your opinion, but I have also met a number of public office holders who don't share your opinion and who actually believe that lobbying is a legitimate activity, and professionals in government relations actually provide them with information that they need to make the decisions that are in the public interest.
When they provide information, I find that useful. When they provide, you should do this because of who I am, I find that less useful. So I'm wondering if you have any way of measuring if they're in compliance with the Act, when it is still considered to be lobbying, when it ceases to be considered lobbying, regardless of the 5-year cooling off period, because not all of them were ministers or staff at that level.
Well, what I can say is under the Code of Conduct, there are rules for which lobbyists are not entitled to put you, public office holders, in a situation that it puts you in a conflict of interest or demonstrating that it's preferential access or preferential treatment. And so if there is a previous relationship that exists there, for whatever reason, that would be improper. But beyond from having fact-specific cases, I can't go beyond that.
Understood. In what circumstances would you provide an exemption to the 5-year cooling off period?
The Lobbying Act provides that I can give an exemption for those who have been there for a very short period of time, who had administrative duties, possibly in an acting position for a very short period of time. In the last year, we had 11 requests, one that came from last year. So we had 12, 3 withdrew, and out of the 9 requests, I granted 4 and declined 5. And the 4 was all because individuals had been there for administrative support and or summer students, for example.
Understood. I'll give the remaining time I have to Mr. Smith, if I could.
3 minutes.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I take note of your concerns about the current budget envelope. Previously, we just had Mr. Dion here, and he had no such concerns, and I won't comment on the workload, but it does occur to me that combining the offices would you have complementary functions, whereas the information commissioner, which you have significant experience with, to some extent there's complementary functions with the privacy commissioner, but there's oftentimes that they are at odds in the sense that sometimes access to information is at odds with privacy, and they view their respective jurisdictions and rightly, I think, that they want to protect privacy. If you're the privacy commissioner, you want to protect access to information if you're the information commissioner. So in a way, I can understand not combining those offices, although there are probably efficiencies to be found. In the case of lobbying and the ethics commissioner, I'm a bit baffled that they are not one office. What do you think about that?
For sure, if there's consideration to join the two offices, there should be a study to look at whether or not there could be some efficiencies and costs. We have no one that does HR. We have our server is held by OPC. We have the Human Rights Commission who offers us all the services in contracting and in HR. So we use the outside. I don't have enough people, 27, to do. So we do have a contract.
Yeah, the ethics commissioner is sitting there with HR and...
I don't have that luxury. So I do believe that there's cost efficiencies that could happen. Whether or not they're worth amalgamating, I don't know because I have not done the study. What I would recommend the committee to do, if it's something that you are considering, is approach our provincial counterparts. The both information and privacy are joined in the provinces. Lobbying, my colleague in Ontario holds about 7 hats, and so it might be interesting for you to speak to them. The issue, I think, becomes institutional bias. How can you be requested something from the lobbyist knowing what possibly a member of parliament has disclosed to you? So it's how you manage or create the walls to ensure that one set of information doesn't influence the other, although having the full picture sometimes might help.
The last comment I would just make is I would encourage you to turn your attention to this at the very least if you haven't already. We in our democracy have very strict election finance rules. And in part, I think the idea is if someone donates to my campaign or to Mr. Kent's campaign or to Ms. Mathis's campaign and donates up to $1,600, there's very little influence in the grand. I mean, it's a de minimis amount in many ways, in contrast to what we see in other jurisdictions, including the United States. So the extent to which they thereafter could exert influence on us in our roles as elected officials is nil, I would say. And yet we start to see now parallel campaigns being run by third-party organizations in parallel with political parties, very closely in parallel with political parties, and they receive significant sums of corporate dollars that are not in any way de minimis. And so the extent to which those companies and individuals then can exert influence thereafter is of great concern to me. And if you haven't, in your offices, hadn't turned your mind to that idea, I would encourage you to do so.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We have to move on. So, Mr. Kent, for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Commissioner, for appearing before us again. As my colleague said, we had an interesting conversation with the Ethics Commissioner in the last hour, and we talked to a certain extent about the enhanced outreach and the communications, the webinars, the meetings that have been going on with your offices. And Commissioner Dion made it clear that you don't talk about specific cases. But with regards to the federal court order to you regarding a decision made, which I believe was termed a reviewable error of the previous commissioner, I asked the Ethics Commissioner, how could there be a finding of wrongdoing and an illegal gift on one side of the equation when there seems to be a different application of definition of benefit or gift on the other side? So I'm wondering, one, what your thoughts are there, and whether you could tell us whether you have proceeded to comply with the federal court order or whether you're waiting. We understand there may be a government appeal.
The appeal has been filed. I can confirm that. I will answer your question to the best of my ability, knowing that there is an appeal before the court. The first thing I will say is that I have the greatest respect for the federal court. I article there, I work there, and I will always abide by a decision of a judge, and you will never hear me criticize or comment in any way, shape, or form, negative way, the decisions. And so I will abide by the decision of the Federal Court of Appeal. I think in this particular decision, though, however, to clarify your point, I don't think the issue was on the different definition of a gift, was whether or not the Aga Khan was subject to the lobbying rules in light of the fact that he is someone that does not get paid, and therefore that was the issue. So I will wait for the decision of the Federal Court of Appeal. I have not started. I always, and that's been my experience as a lawyer, I always wait the 30-day appeal period before I start anything, and I've always had that practice. And so I will wait the decision, and I will abide by the decision.
A hypothetical question, but one that I think is quite simple. Were you to actually launch an investigation, what sort of timeline would you expect that to take? Would you start at the beginning? Or would you narrow it down to the question at hand?
Well, for people that have worked with me would know that I would likely start at the beginning. I would like to personally get to the bottom of the story. However, I would also take advantage of the fact that the facts are out there already. So I will use what is out there to advance it as quickly as possible. I have also told my team that if and when we start this investigation, or it wasn't an investigation, actually, the court has told to start the review again because it was not at the stage of investigation. I would likely do a report to Parliament on that. So in order for everyone to understand what was my interpretation of the matter.
With regards to the 15 investigations and the 3 investigations referred to the RCMP, there is a difference in your office and between your office and the Ethics Commissioner's office in terms of announcing investigations or referrals of publicly incidents in the public domain. Can you tell us anything about the 3 referred investigations to the RCMP?
I can't. And really, the reason why I don't confirm and I don't deny it is exactly for that, not to jeopardize any type of investigation that the RCMP will be doing. It's in a weird situation. The way our act is written, if it's an offense, in other words, if it's unregistered lobbying or lobbying law prohibited, when I have reasonable grounds to believe that that's happened, I have to suspend. I don't finish those investigations. They go to the RCMP. Very often, I don't even possibly talk to the person who is alleged because it's all about self-incrimination, right? So I don't go there. If I do investigations only under the code, those will lead to a report to Parliament unless I cease them.
I wonder if I could, how many minutes do I have? 2 minutes. There are 2 stories in the public domain relating with great probability to your office. One of the unanswered questions in the SNC Lavalin scandal regarding the phone call from the former clerk of the Privy Council, now the chair of SNC Lavalin, to the then current clerk of the Privy Council, which lasted some 10 minutes. Was that, to your mind, and again, just on the evidence that is in the public domain already, an offense under the Act?
What's in the public domain probably it doesn't include enough information for me to make a finding, and I will leave it at that for that particular file.
Would it be improper to assume an investigation is underway?
I can't comment.
The other case is the matter of a big dollar liberal fundraising event at which an American citizen with an interest in lobbying the Prime Minister and the Infrastructure Minister was gifted a ticket to that event, either by a liberal or by a lobbyist. Many people would think that that would justify investigation.
Again, I can't comment.
All right. Time? 1 minute left. I wonder then if we could just talk about and coming back to Mr. Erskine-Smith's questions about merging some of the elements of the office with regards to investigation. I mean, the investigation of the Trudeau report, for example, which involved both sides of a situation. Would there have been benefit there in the sharing of information of his fairly extensive and aggressive investigation while it was still being considered by your predecessor?
Obviously, when it's a common issue and it's the flip side of the same issue, it would be interesting to do these interviews at the same time. But right now, we can't even talk to each other about whether or not. Obviously, he makes public that he investigates, so I'm aware of what he's doing. But for some, I don't think he makes everything public, but he doesn't know what I'm seized of. Interestingly, when the Privacy Commissioner issued their report a few weeks ago with the BC Commissioner, the first thing I asked, how did you do this? And I guess there is a section in their respective legislation that allows them to do investigations jointly. So it does exist. There's precedent for it.
Final question, would you recommend that the same practice be followed in your case?
Certainly, if that is the will of Parliament, we will abide by that.
Thank
yes.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Next up for 7 minutes, Ms. Matheson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. It's lovely to have a chance to meet you, and I'm going to be following up with some questions, some of which will just be me thinking out loud if you can't answer, but wherever you can, I would truly appreciate it. Recently, your office issued a report on sponsored travel and unregistered lobbying that could be happening on these trips. I guess Captain Renault from Casablanca is one of those situations. At any rate, how would you monitor unregistered lobbying on these trips? How did you find that, and how do you respond? Can you tell us?
Okay. Well, the first thing I will clarify, I did not find that there were some unregistered lobbying that occurred on these trips. This was extremely complex. It had been going on for a number of years, 19 organizations, going back for a period of 7 years. I not personally, the investigative team spoke to the heads of each of these organizations. We as well confirmed with members of Parliament whether or not lobbying had occurred on these trips. When it did, the organizations filled in their monthly communication report as they should. And when they didn't lobby, well, then they did not put the monthly communication report. And so how do I monitor? We investigate if there is an allegation. Otherwise, it is the goodwill of lobbyists to put in their monthly communications report in the registry. And they do. There were 27,500 of them in the past year.
That's a lot to investigate.
Yeah.
I understand your problems in regard to budgeting in that particular term. The statutory review of the Lobbying Act is years overdue at this point, and I wonder, in your opinion, should Parliament direct this committee to have a review and examine the legislation as soon as possible?
Well, that, again, is the will of Parliament to decide if the lobbying needs to be reviewed. I mean, it works quite well, I think, although it has some issues that I would like to see resolved. And so I am prepared, and I continue to get prepared to come before you if the review ever starts. In particular, I find that when I came the last time, I had 4 months under my belt in this position. Now I have about a year and a half. Every day, there's situations that come up and I go, oh my goodness, I wish that this could possibly be in the law. So as I move along, I adjust possibly the recommendations that I will make if I'm invited to speak on them.
Okay. So obviously, it would be a good thing if this committee were to invite you to speak, since you have a number of issues that you could provide good, sound recommendations for. Okay.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chair, I hope that is duly noted. Thank you.
Yeah, gotcha.
Now, my colleague, Mr. Angus, requested an investigation about SNC-Lavalin's lobbying practices, and I wondered, are you going to act on that request? And when we saw information in that regard, we saw numerous lobbying attempts, as it were. Did that raise any red flags with you? And are you able to go ahead on Mr. Angus' request?
I will repeat what I've said. I can't comment on the whether there is an investigation or not. What I do want to reassure the committee is that very often when I get letters, I know what's going on already. We're really on top of we observe what's in the media. We listen to what's going on in the House. We're extremely proactive. We do not sit and wait to see what comes on our desk from members of the public or from members of Parliament or from senators. And that's really all I can comment on that.
Okay, and now I'm into the thinking out loud. I'm interested in what you said in regard to the court's ruling on the Aga Khan, and it seems to me that in regard to a benefit, the holiday may have been a benefit, but there was also the concern about the Aga Khan's foundation receiving funding. So is there not a benefit then to at least the Aga Khan through his foundation? And wouldn't that raise some issues and cause a need to look?
Again, I think I will wait for the decision of the Court of Appeal to proceed. What I can say to this committee, if the decision remains, if the Court of Appeal does not overturn the federal court decision, that will mean that, yes, I will look at the matter again. It will also mean that the office will likely require resources, because it will also mean more people will be subject to the legislation. It will also mean that I may have to investigate a lot more files, and so there might be some resource implications there. But again, I will wait to see what the court says, and I will abide by it.
Thank you. Oh, all right, very quickly, you talked about mental health strategy, and it seems to me that obviously with all of the work that your office does, your staff is under stress. I wondered, I'd be interested in that strategy. How are you going to cope with burnout and stress?
I'm personally extremely demanding. I know that, and I tell my staff that, but I also tell them every day a big thank you. And I have in the office a champion responsible for mental health, a committee who send us emails, who send us tools, who we do activities, we have speakers, and we also very much accommodate people who we may feel are under stress. We also do it with humor. I always tell people we don't do heart surgery. What we do is extremely important. It's important for democracy. We take it extremely seriously. But at the end of the day, their health is primary to me and to them. And then we go about our day, and so far, so good.
Thank you. Next up for 7 minutes or less, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
I fulfilled my. I got the answers, and I put my questions to the commissioner. So I would just say thanks for being here, and keep up the good work.
Yeah.
Thank you
So
very
that
much.
brings us to the end of our questions for you, Commissioner.
fast.
Thank you. Yeah, it did go fast.
So
Yeah,
it
you
was
weren't
too
just
fast.
dreaming.
Thank you
It
very
did go
much.
fast. Thank you very much. We'll just suspend. We're going to go into. Okay, before we suspend, everybody, come back. We just have to vote on the estimates. So quickly, we good to go?
You don't have to say the dollar amounts, just
Shall vote 1 under the office of the Commissioner of Lobbying carry? Yes. All in favor? All opposed? Shall vote 1 under the office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner carry? All in favor? All opposed? Carried. Shall vote 1 under the office of the Senate Ethics Commissioner carry? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Shall vote 1 under the offices of the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Canada carry? All in favor? All opposed? Carries. Shall vote 5 under the offices of the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Canada carry? All in favor? All opposed? Carried. Shall vote 10 under the offices of the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Canada, carry. All in favor? All opposed? Good. Shall vote 15 under the offices of the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Canada, carry. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, so shall the chair report the main estimates 2019, 2020 in the interim estimates to the House? All in favor? All opposed? Good, I will do that. And I think that's it for us today. So we're going to suspend just to make sure the room is clear. It looks like that is almost the case, and we'll go into committee business right away. So we'll suspend.